Livingston, Tennessee, on our line for Democrats. Wayne, go ahead. Is that Wayne or Waylon?
Waylon.
Waylon, go ahead, Waylon.
Yes, I was just stating that the marijuana industry should be treated as a cash crop. It should be like corn and tobacco. And that way the government can regulate and the people can get what they want. It's just that simple. Everything else is just for other people to make money, evidently. But if you control it as you do corn and tobacco, you should have no problem with it. You have your age limits. You have everything you need regulated already.
Asa Hutchinson.
Well, that's a totally different direction than we're going in our country now. I certainly understand from the previous caller in Brownsville, Texas, the frustration along the border. I note that President Calderon of Mexico made the point that if Proposition 19 in California, which would legalize possession of marijuana, that would be totally against everything we're asking Mexico to do today, which is to reduce the flow of illegal drugs coming into our country. And so he, it would certainly be inconsistent with the direction that we're going. In terms of taxing and regulating, it's all a question of whether you want another move a substance like marijuana from a illegal environment to a regulated environment. If you do that, consumption will increase. And that's the fundamental question. Do the parents of our nation want marijuana use to increase? In Alaska, I believe it was in the 70s, they decriminalized marijuana. And then when consumption went up, they saw the problems and the social problems, and voters once again recriminalized it and said that's not the direction we want to go. So again, we have to learn from those slices of history, and I think that's one of them that show consumption would go up and it would be harmful to our nation.
We've got a Twitter message here from Thought Monkey who writes, Mr. Hutchinson, how would ending cannabis prohibition affect the DEA? Would the DEA receive less funding, and would less funding be bad for your organization, your former organization?
Great question, and let's think that through. First of all, the DEA is simply in charge of enforcing whatever the Controlled Substances Act, which Congress gave them to enforce. So if you shift one drug, marijuana, from an illegal status to a legal status, it really doesn't change the mission of the DEA. They have their hands full with methamphetamine. They have their hands full with the diversion of prescription drugs, that's the problem. You're going to have diversion of marijuana. They would still have an enforcement problem. If you regulate it, you're still going to have the marijuana sold in the black market. You've got heroin, you've got the ecstasy, you've got all kinds of drugs that they would still have their enforcement responsibilities. So I really think the opposition of the former administrators of the DEA is based upon not the mission of the DEA, but simply the direction that we are concerned about in terms of where our country goes.
Next up, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Rich on our line for Republicans. You're on the Washington Journal.
Yeah, good morning. I have a problem with the decriminalization of marijuana. In Massachusetts, they took this marijuana law and they said if you're in possession of a small amount of marijuana, it becomes a civil offense. Therefore, it's just a small. They take the stuff away and they fine you a little bit. But my question is, where do the people who got the little bit amount get the big amount? From the people that are actually a criminal enterprise that are doing this to begin with. So aren't the people that are on the lower end subsidizing the efforts of a criminal activity?
Mr. St. Pierre?
Indeed they are. That's called prohibition. And decriminalization in the United States affects about 1/3 of the population. 120 million people live in 14 states that have decriminalized marijuana. State of Massachusetts happens to be my home state. The voters, democracy in its finest little D way, voted at the 65 percentile. Almost every single city in the state of Massachusetts voted to decriminalize marijuana. So you're absolutely correct on identifying that decriminalization is a half-baked loaf. It is only really good for a consumer like myself if I got pulled over and I had to give up my cannabis to the state and pay what I would call a left-handed fine of a $100 tax, that would be much better than getting arrested and drawn into the criminal justice system, but it never addresses the taxation, wholesale, and retail concerns.
In two papers this morning, the Washington Post and the Financial Times, both of them have headlines regarding the situation in Amsterdam. Dutch, in the Financial Times, it says Dutch looking at weeding out cannabis cafes, and in the Washington Post, Amsterdam's cannabis-selling coffee shops face a crackdown. Incoming coalition government seeks to tighten tolerance rules. Asa Hutchinson, what did the Dutch know that maybe we can learn from here in the United States?
Well, I've actually been in Amsterdam, and I've toured the districts where the cannabis shops have been located historically, and it's wide open. And it's not just cannabis, but it's other drugs as well. I'm marching around with the chief of police of Amsterdam, and somebody comes up and offers me, ecstasy. And so, whenever you have a recreational drug haven, people go there and other drugs are sold. In terms of what they're seeing now is, though, I think they're seeing the danger of the direction they're going with usage increasing. It looks like they're trying to crack down on the overabundance of these cannabis houses, and I think they're learning again that this social experiment has not worked out as well as they thought.
Next up is Claude in Wendell, Massachusetts, on our line for Independence. Go ahead.
Oh, Washington Journal. Wow, thank you. Thanks for taking my call. I want to make three or four points. And and since I'm from Massachusetts, I wanted to respond to that Massachusetts thing. One, it is just a plant, and a cannabis plant is just a plant in nature. And it's going to be kind of tough for Mr. Hutchinson to ever get rid of, nature. The other thing about Massachusetts is when they were down in Beacon Hill, when they put the law together, there wasn't anything after the fine of $100. There's no penalty after that. So if you don't want to pay the fine, you don't even have to pay the fine. And the other point was, Mr. Hutchinson's everything he said so far has been fear-based. And I believe everybody would agree with this, that it's all based on fear, because the government really doesn't have anything to do with this plant. They just can't get a handle on it. It's a plant. So it has to have a fear base to it, so that we all are in fear. And, of course, we're all in fear of the D.E.A. We're all in fear of the cops cracking your head open like a ripe melon. So,
we'll leave it there, Claude. Asa Hutchinson.
Well, if I had a conversation with a caller, I'd probably say, when Massachusetts said it's only going to be a fine and that's the only risk you have, was he or she more likely to use marijuana because of that decriminalization? And I think the answer is yes. I think there is you can call it a fear factor. Certainly there's a fear in the enforcement of the law that discourages use, and that really impacts young people. Not only do they hear the message from the parents that this is harmful, don't go this direction, but you also hear the society from leaders and law enforcement that this is bad for you, and that you have consequences to those actions. So all of that does work together to create a climate of reduced use. But I also think it's a message of hope, and that's where you're always going to struggle each generation with drug usage and addiction issues, and that's why it's not just a law enforcement question, but it's let's invest in education. It's very successful. I believe in drug treatment courts and alternative punishments. It's a very important part of it, particularly whenever you can have accountability in those programs. They really show success. And so I think those are messages of hope for parents and for communities that we can address this very difficult challenge.
Alan St. Pierre of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, what do you say to folks that say the passage of Proposition 19 would give people the right to smoke marijuana on the job?
Absurd. The same way that you and I cannot come, in the cases you were being employed here at C-SPAN, you could never come to work here drunk just because alcohol is legal. So I think this is an absurd argument being put forward, mainly by the law enforcement community. The same local mores and values, the same ever-evolving standards we've developed in our lifetimes for alcohol and tobacco are completely applicable, as they should be, for marijuana. If people are going to use marijuana, we're going to have the same restrictions that we have for alcohol. No ifs, ands, or buts. Anybody who thinks otherwise is completely utopian.
Asa Hutchinson, explain to us the Constitution's supremacy clause and how this would play into the enforcement of the ban on marijuana.
Well, great question. Of course, the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution says that if federal and state law are in conflict, federal law trumps, is supreme to conflicting state laws, and this is illustrated by the Obama administration has taken the position that Arizona cannot enact local laws on immigration issues because they may conflict with federal law, and that's an area that the federal government has regulated. Well, we've asked the Attorney General to apply the same analysis to California's Proposition 19, that clearly if Proposition 19 is passed, there's a conflict with federal law. Under the supremacy clause, federal law trumps. And so the voters of California should be aware of this in advance, and I think the Attorney General should take just as aggressive a role in making that message known about the supremacy clause when it comes to conflicting marijuana laws enacted by the states. So that's the supremacy clause. I think it's very relevant to this debate.
Our last call is from Omaha, Nebraska. Susan on our line for Democrats.
Good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Hutchinson, I have epilepsy, and I was always told not to use drugs, so I didn't because I don't enjoy having seizures. And then I came down with glaucoma. And then I became very scared because I was starting to go blind. And at the age of 38, and I'm 53 now, I kept hearing, oh, how much, weed would help, someone with glaucoma. And I took the risk to see if it would help me. And sure enough, I didn't have a seizure, and my neurologist said that marijuana can't give me a seizure. And when I went to my ophthalmologist, I smoked just like half a joint before I went to my my appointment, and my pressure came down.
Susan, we're running out of time, so we need to get to the point. Are you smoking marijuana now as a part of your treatment?
I'm too afraid not to because the eye drops don't work.
Are you getting it legally or illegally in Nebraska?
Well, there's only one way in Nebraska, and that's illegally. But I would like to ask Mr. Hutchinson, whose fault is that for me to trying this?
All right, Susan, we're going to leave it there. Asa Hutchinson?
Well, first of all, I think we all want medicine for patients with problems, but we usually look to the American Medical Association, science, to determine what's good medicine. I don't know whether the lady tried Marinol, which a doctor can prescribe, which has the THC content of marijuana, so it is medical marijuana that can be prescribed. But in terms of smoking marijuana, that's something that we need to look to science. This debate is not about medical marijuana in California. It's about straightforward legalization of pot, and so I think we have to distinguish the debate between the other debate on medical marijuana.
Alan St. Pierre, you got the last word, briefly.
The citizens in California in about 3 weeks are going to do something absolutely cataclysmic by voting to legalize marijuana. If they don't do it now, they're going to do it by 2012. It's a fait accompli that citizens in the United States will vote to legalize marijuana.
Asa Hutchinson in New York City, former administrator of the D.E.A., and Alan St. Pierre here in Washington, D.C., executive director of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Gentlemen, thank you both for being on the Washington Journal.
Thank you.